All right, welcome everybody. We are in Paris Innovation Summit and we're here with Jay Abdallah, Vice President of Cybersecurity Solution and Services at Schneider Electric. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so advancement in technology like smart assets, AI, and IoT are intended to better serve the human workforce, make them more effective, more efficient. Maybe how has this acceleration warranted additional safety standards and regulatory pressures to comply with defend against industry vulnerabilities?
So when it comes to the advancement in technology,
Yes.
the first thing that we have to recognize is that there are efficiencies being gained. It is more effective to have these types of solutions out in the field. But the reason for the drive in terms of industry standards is because there's a justification, of course, is because the attack surface has changed. It's increased. So when we take into consideration that increased surface angle, anything that's protected now, anything that is connected requires an additional layer of protection. So these standards are actually being driven by the industry. In many cases, you're looking at standards such as IEC 62443. There's 4 different security assurance levels within it. But in some cases, even regionally specific, we have specific standards that are company produced. So they might be based off of a framework from an IEC standard, but they have their own based on the fact that the attack surface has changed and they want to make sure to get protection from all of the different angles.
Got it, thank you for that. And you touched on a good topic there around the IT and OT perhaps expansion there. So do you see this merging? Where is this convergence? Because we've been hearing about a number of years around that. So
convergence is definitely happening. It's not happening everywhere, but it's
Yes.
definitely happening. So when we take a look at some industries, for example, like data centers, the digital grid, for example, even in pharmaceutical industries,
Right.
we are seeing that convergence take place, where you have the controls that have been around for quite some time in the enterprise or carpeted space, and they want to take advantage of efficiencies without reinventing the wheel by considering the same implementation down at the southern layers. However, in some critical national infrastructure, especially in energies and chemical, for example, it's still not happening. They're very much separated, they're
Right.
very much isolated. Now, with that being said, again, taking advantage of some of the more advanced and efficient controls with IoT connected devices, we have to kind of flirt with that line of
Right.
security versus capability. So it's really important for an OEM such as ours to provide a vendor agnostic solution that bridges that gap so that they can take advantage of the efficiencies and the new technologies while still running a very protected environment.
got it. And some would say perhaps even the standards are not happening fast enough. You see new organizations like, talking about example by buildings, they're building cybersecurity born out of the fact that some of the
That's
standards
exactly
may
right.
not move fast enough. Now, talk about some of the, how many of the risk mitigation that's required inside a production facility are present at the top floor, meaning at the boardroom?
So some of these technologies, at least the basic controls, have been around for decades in the enterprise space. We're talking about endpoint protection and backup and disaster recovery, patch management, et cetera. They've been around forever. Now, some of the more advanced controls, especially when it comes to the difference between prioritizing specific protocols, or at least understanding specific protocols, and then, of course, optimizing the operation itself, compatibility, and performance. This is where you start getting into a little bit of a delineation between the IT and the OT from a controls perspective. So what we're seeing now is that requirement, again, for a vendor-agnostic solution set that is developed or co-developed by an OEM like ours that's focusing on some of the more advanced technology controls which are not really found in the IT world today. They're more specifically designed for OT with OT protocols in the back of their minds, and of course taking that optimization from a performance and an uptime perspective into consideration.
Got it, thank you. Now, you've touched on OT security. When we started the company, there's very few people talking about the OT cybersecurity. It was an industry that's emerging still today. There's a lot of money being poured into it. You see billion-dollar valuation. What are some of the tools and methods that are being taken to minimize the cybersecurity and safety risk?
Well, that's a great question. So, it really starts, we've been saying the same thing for so many years now. I almost sound like I'm repeating myself, and I apologize to some of our viewers if it sounds so repetitive, but it is still so important. It always starts with people. If you take a look at the attack landscape, for example, just in the last 5 years, let's stay relatively recent, there's been a 70% increase in attacks specifically for OT and critical national infrastructure. In addition to that, right alongside it, 70% of employees still don't understand cybersecurity, at least at a little bit of a deeper level. Now, with that being said, we have to have policies, procedures in place with a training regimen and a fully supported, executively driven program that prioritizes risk mitigation from the people perspective. Now, at some point, we're going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about controls. So in that case, we start again, if you look at the vast majority, 90% of the attacks could be mitigated with the basic controls. Here you're talking about network segmentation, endpoint protection, backup and disaster recovery, and patch management. Now what we do is we take it one step further. We co-develop solutions that are specific for OT, that are looking at things like intrusion detection and prevention, quantum resilient controls. This is where we have end-to-end network-based encryption to really make sure that our most important, our most critical assets in the OT layer are protected.
Got it, thank you. And I want to end with one question around your favorite sort of metrics for success or metrics for protection in industrial cybersecurity. What's your favorite?
So my favorite is visibility. I like making sure that we have access to the assets that are out in the field. I was at a recent event in Florida a couple of years ago, and we asked a room full of 250 CISOs what their number one metric was. And their biggest concern came back was that they simply didn't have visibility into the assets that were out there in the field. So it became that much more important for us to recognize that once we have an understanding of what assets are out there in the field, we can develop a program to protect them. We can understand their vulnerability levels, and we can deploy security countermeasures or security controls to make sure that we mitigate risk. But Schneider Electric, what we do is we're not just developing these solutions with our vendors, with our partners, we're also providing a consistency when it comes to that value chain. So having those solutions implemented into the field, but then having somebody, an OEM for example, with eyes on site that are consistently keeping up with those vulnerability levels and able to report the environment to do predictive analytics, this is really where you start adding some major value into the value chain of security controls.
Jay, thank you very much. And if you're in the audience have questions about ICS cybersecurity or OT security or IT and OT security, feel free to leverage the hashtag on a screen, and we'll get Jay and somebody on his team to provide answers for you, or we'll get Jay back on another interview at a future event.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.